I hate to start the video off with a disclaimer, but I gotta do it. Design systems is a gigantic topic, and there are entire courses dedicated to teaching design systems, from the code point of view to naming conventions to design files. So I'm going to do my best to cover the most foundational aspects of the design system and how we can apply that to our designs practically in our design tool. But just know that there is a world of information and an entire rabbit hole times infinity that you can dive into when it comes to design systems. So with that out of the way, I want to first start off by saying a design system only works if everyone agrees to use it. Sometimes you'll have a company that has a design system, but then you have others on the developer team that might build part of the app not using the system. So maybe it's like halfway implemented, and that's not going to work very well. And people are only going to want to use the system if it allows for confident decision making, if it makes sense for everyone to use, and it provides lots of options, and maybe most importantly, it's scalable. So a design system doesn't have to be everything under the sun and you don't use anything else, and this is all you have, just only use these blocks. A design system should be scalable to where you can introduce new components as needed, and someone has to be in charge of shepherding and evangelizing that design system within the organization. And this is more on a really large scale, but you can imagine that all of these different people involved makes it quite challenging to just create a design system. So one of the main things that goes into a design system are the use cases for the system and also naming convention. These are two of the perhaps biggest factors that go into even creating the system in the first place. Naming and categorizing things is often one of the most challenging aspects of the design system in and of itself. Naming conventions should typically follow the hierarchy of information, but what if there is not any hierarchy in your project? What if no one has decided whether something should be sorted by color or size first? This is what can make it more difficult, because in some organizations, color might be a top level category. And so all of the yellow things need to go under this category. And other organizations that it might be size. All of the large components go here, and maybe there are color variations underneath it. So it just depends on like what is the more important hierarchy. So kind of determining categorization and determining naming structures, that is going to play a big role in how you name your components. There also might be stakeholder and developer opinions about how things should be named as well. So this is all kind of comes crashing together in this big messy sequence of events between designing things, putting in the code, and making it available for everyone to use, both designers and developers. So it can be quite challenging. Not everything that you work on needs to have this huge, scalable, dynamic design system that covers every single possible use case and every single thing known to man, what would go into it and what we would use it for. Sometimes you don't need that at all. So imagine you are working in a small office with 3 people, and you put a label on a box and it includes various small office supplies. In the box, you were going to place staples, paper clips, sticky notes, and scissors. Just a handful of items. So what would be the best label to put on the box? Assuming that the box was on a shelf and you couldn't see the contents inside the box. You might consider the name small office supplies, but is your coworker going to confidently pull the small office supplies box off of the shelf when they're just looking for sticky notes? Or what if they're looking for scissors? Now, if you've previously had a conversation with that coworker about where the sticky notes and the scissors are, or if you only have a small amount of office supplies and you tell everyone, hey, if you need any office supplies, they're in that little box over there, then that box of small office supplies makes perfect sense, because that's where everything is, just kind of all thrown in there. It's a simple system, a simple little box, everything's thrown in, and it doesn't need anything else, because everyone who is an employee there knows exactly where to get it. And it's a simple, messy system, but it is a system and it works. And sometimes your designs can be the same exact way as that small office supply box. You don't have to create this incredibly large, dynamically scalable, huge design system. But say a new employee comes, the company grows a little bit, and they are trying to figure out how to get the scissors. Where do I find the scissors? And they haven't talked to anyone. They don't know where that small office supply box is. So that's where documentation comes in handy. That's why you see these big website with lots of documentation. Here's how you implement it. Here's the name of everything. But then again, do you want your new employee to consult documentation every single time they're looking for scissors or sticky notes? Most of the time when you're just getting started with a new project, you don't need a huge, robust system. You just need to get organized enough to where it can make sense to scale it gradually beyond there. And then when you run into a challenge, like someone not being able to find the scissors, then maybe you need to consider dividing that one big box into separate boxes. And then that allows you to build on more diverse groupings of information. And then it becomes a little bit more scalable as you add in more people. So that's my big spiel about the theory of design systems. Let's actually dive into a couple of different examples ranging from very simple to a lot more complex. So let's take a look. All right. So I've got here a pretty iconic design system, the mighty Lego brick. And you can see I've got this guy right here, Master Brick Single. All right, so I'm going to actually make a copy of this just so we can kind of dissect what's going on here. So I've got a background here with a green color, and I put the highlight and the shadow on this existing color so it would have the exact same color inside. And the reason I put the highlight and shadow on a separate layer is because if you try to put that on an opacity object like this, you can see how the drop shadow actually changes the color of the background because it's actually the opacity is letting the shadow bleed through. And so if I make this shadow really dark, the opacity ends up letting that bleed through. And that's not really what we want to go with. So I wanted a way that would allow me to make one change to the color of this brick and it would apply to the entire thing. So that's why I have this is a fully solid color. And then I've got the highlight just as an extra little fill. I could even call this highlight fill. And this is my highlight and shadow. I could even just call these effects or even shorter effects. So put that back on there. And all of a sudden I have a pretty nice looking little Lego block. Okay, from here, now that I've got my single brick, now I can make a copy of this. And then I can, just like I have in this above example, I can butt these right against each other, and I'm going to have the exact same distance between these two objects as I would if I were to put them on top and bottom. So you can see if I draw a little rectangle measuring tool here, got 20 pixels of space between this middle object and that middle object, and then exactly the same amount of space in here. So that's one of the things that you want to consider when you're working on your design system components. Think about the component background expanding completely to the screen's edge, or at least think of your components as a fully flexible 100% width item, and then build that padding into it, whether it is 24 pixels or 16 pixels or 18 pixels. And then also make sure you consider how that affects everything when it stacks on top of each other, whether it's a list or a profile, photo, and name, and then there's padding. That's why in some of those layout modules, I was stressing over and over about make sure you use that implicit grid and you're focused and pay lots of attention to detail on every little tiny aspect of that entire component. And the reason for that is when you go to actually build these components with code, you will be able to effectively put these in as individual components and just kind of snap them all together, and it should work nice and easy together. And then I can create an additional component called master/brick/double with basically two of these interior master brick single. So really every one of these, even though this is a master component, it's really just a bunch of these put together. I could technically even create a brick of 4 out of these two instead of having 4 individuals. I think in this one I have individuals as well, but you could technically create this other one with, kind of this nesting situation. But this is where the naming conventions get tricky, because do you want to start incorporating colors into the naming convention of your system? Or would you rather have a variation of this one master brick single? We could technically see, I haven't really named these anything yet. I haven't created individual components for these. These are just modified versions that I haven't actually saved as additional components. all I've done is I've gone in here and I've created a version. I've created some selection colors here: green, blue, red, brown, yellow, light gray, etc. So maybe in this example, I might want to say, okay, you know what? This one should be, it's a single brick. So, should I call this single brick? It's not a master component because this one's the master component. So maybe this one is just brick, single, and then this one's green. And so if I use that naming convention like this, and then I convert it to a master component, and then I do the same thing with this one, brick, single, blue, and then I convert that one to a master component. Now when I get ready to, if I have a copy of this, now I have green and blue because they're related. The reason they're related now is because of the way that I've named these. I've got brick, single, green, and I've got brick, single, blue. And so now when I get ready to use an override, whatever is on the last half of that slash right there is going to be inside of there. So you can see if I change the name of this blue and I removed the category marker and I changed it like that, now when I look in here, you can see that brick, single, like green and blue are not related because I haven't named it the proper convention. So if I just get in here and I'm really thoughtful about naming this, okay, brick, single, green, brick, single, blue, and now I can go brick, single, red, convert that to a component. And I'm intentionally creating a component within a component. That way, if I ever wanted to get in here and modify this master and say, for some reason, I wanted it to look like that, all of a sudden, everything is still intact. And I've got multiple layers of abstraction to really be able to control certain parts and certain elements of that. So I'll get back in here, change this again. So we've got brick, single. Sometimes I'll just copy and paste part of that. That way it's quicker to rename. So now I'll go brick, single, red, yellow, or brick, single, yellow, brick, single, brown, and brick, single, just call that light. And then I'm going to go ahead and convert these to master components by hitting Command Option K. There we go. And now I'll bring my other versions down here. So now if I wanted to recreate these, now originally what I did was I went in here and I just made a copy of master brick single, and then I changed the color to blue like that. And because I'm not changing this transparent color, I still have this version on top, still stays intact. But now that I've created individual nested components, now I can go up here and now they're all named the exact same way. All of these right here are named the exact same way with that naming convention. And that last identifier on the last half of that slash mark is going to allow me to have these instances all related. So now I can say, okay, actually I want the blue one here, and now I want the red one. Now we want yellow. Now we want brown. And now we also want the light. So we can recreate this exact same version that we did here by now we have that option. But there is, you could technically make a case for maybe all of the blue blocks could be in the same thing. So you might if you decided as an organization we want to organize things by color, you might change the entire naming structure. You might say, this is brick blue single, and this is brick blue 8. Maybe you say brick blue 1, brick blue 2, brick blue 3, so on and so forth. So now that I've got brick blue single and brick blue 8, if I have an instance of that, let's just say this is an icon on the tail end of some other type of frame, components, whatever you want to call it. I've got a line item and an icon here. Well, if this is not the same size as some of the related objects and I go to change it, it's still going to be a related component because of the name, because I have brick blue single and brick blue 8. That's going to make and force the categorization to exist. And now when I go to change it, it's going to do that. And that's not really going to work for a lot of the scalable components unless you have the ability for this entire component to grow. But most of the time you're going to be switching out components with, on the smaller scale, you'll be switching out smaller elements of the same size. So I personally like the idea of naming things in this convention where the size is actually taking precedent over the variation of color. There's different ways you can do this. There's not necessarily going to be a 100% right or wrong way. And a lot of the times you might not even need to do this when you're first getting started. It's important to know that you're going to need to be able to design a bunch of different iterations before you get worried about making things components, before you get worried about creating a design system. You're going to need to know what you're designing first. And a lot of times that means getting really messy and exploring, because if you start creating components too quickly, you're going to heavily restrict your ability to make changes on the fly. Even using auto layout sometimes inside of Figma or Sketch and making those dynamic buttons and trying to get really smartly organized with every little thing, that can actually hinder your creativity. So just be really careful that you are, without a doubt, at the point where you're ready to start creating systematic components. And it doesn't have to be you spend 3 weeks designing and then you start creating a component. It can be this constant loop around, okay, I've designed 6 different pages here. This stuff could probably be components. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to create components out of all of that. That way it can be a little bit more dynamic. And then you might go for a long time without creating any other components. And then you just kind of go back and forth, cleaning, renaming, recategorizing, and just so on and so forth. But the nice thing about these little blocks and built-in padding around every single version and variation, whether it is the 2, the 4, or the 8, every single little piece in here has its own little container. All the padding margin is all built in. And because of that, you can confidently stack them all together. And I've created a little mosaic over here of our old pal Mario using all of those same exact blocks. So I'm using all of the same colors, same size and everything. You are limited to what you can do, but you also have a lot of room for creativity to use these blocks in a variety of ways. And if you ever played with Legos, you know that they've just added more and more and more. They have plenty of little one-off components that are based on some new character, but there's always at that base foundation, there's always the Lego brick that snaps with everything else. Okay, now we're going to dive into this actual FlowKit file, and I want to show you how I set up this entire system, because this in and of itself is also a design system. And I want to show this particular system just because I feel like it's a simple example for how simple you can get, but then how many variations and how robust you can actually make a simple little system. So everything in this particular system is built with these master symbols here. So and I made a decision, look at the names of everything. These are cap solid, cap stroke, cap arrow stroke, cap decision, all of these different caps. But look inside of this actual flow component, you can see that I've got these labeled point A and point B. So but this is the arrow master, and then this is the dot master. So I made one layer of abstraction. So I have my dot master, and I'm using this stroke dot as a default. So, the reason I did that was because I wanted the ability to change the default really easily. So if I went in here and I changed the default to dot solid, then it would change every single item in the entire FlowKit document, because every one of these variations, they're built using these main flows right here. And that way if I ever change my mind about what I wanted as the default, I could just change this one here and say, okay, actually I want that to be dot stroke. And so I have all of the actual items here. It's kind of like saying, okay, this button is blue and it's the primary button. So instead of saying button blue, button blue, button blue all inside the code, you say button primary. And that way, if you ever rebrand or change your mind down the road that one color needs to be slightly different, you can go back to where primary is defined in the code and you can change it from blue to red. And then over here, you can define what does blue actually even mean? Is blue this color or is red that color? So there's this layer of abstraction that you use to kind of help you maintain the system, but also give you the ability to go in and change the system. Even the straight line and the curves are individual components. And look at this, they're all the same size, so it makes it a lot more modular, just like those Lego bricks. I'm very focused on making these all the same size, and they're going to make up part of those inner pieces. That way on some of the versions like this, enables the ability to get some of those pieces to stay and some of those pieces to change around. I'm getting in here and I'm saying, okay, this I want to stay on the top left. This one I want to stay on the bottom right. This curve should attach itself to the bottom and the right. And then this curve should stay on the left, right, and the bottom. Whereas this curve now I want it to stay left, top, right, and bottom. So each one of these has different rules associated with it, but it's all based off of this one curve. So if I actually changed my mind and I thought, you know what, I want all of this I want every curve to be purple. I could change this one master curve because it has been abstracted out of its original form. I can change it now here, and now every single curve that's used in the entire Flowkit library is now purple. This makes it really easy for me to update, and it also makes it very streamlined to produce these additional right, left, and all these directions because I can manipulate it and then put it inside of another symbol. And so now I've got all of these flows are built off of these main pieces. But then now I've got my master curve default is actually embedded down into my flow right curve down default. So you can see master curve default is actually a child symbol or component inside of that. And then even in this one, I've got the exact same symbol just rotated with slightly different rules to make it work for that particular version. So there's this concept of abstracting things, 1 layer, 2 layers, sometimes even 3 layers, so that you have very granular control over that system. And it definitely can be a tricky concept to get at first, but you could even just start with 1 layer of abstraction. Instead of saying button blue, you can say button primary, button secondary, and then you define those primary and secondary styles on another section, and you can easily change that and it updates everywhere else. But then you can take it even further with icons and embedded symbols and instances that can make it even more, that can give you even more variety and even more options to use while you're implementing these. All right, so now I want to take a look at something that is a little bit more tangible, a little bit more real world use case. Now, to set some context for this design, this was me and my friend Sam who built this little application, and I didn't need a huge design system to spread across an organization. It was really just for me and for Sam to use, for him to develop with, me to design with. But I did need to test a bunch of designs. I had this little flyout here, so let me just go to my symbols panel to kind of show how everything got built. Now, everything didn't start this way. I didn't organize everything and start designing everything out of organization. You can see this is my 4th version, Contrast UI version 0.1. Let's pull this up and take a look at it. So you can see, look at these really bad designs. I was really focused on the icon, trying to figure out if I wanted to use something like this. And these were just kind of like quick little placeholders. And then slowly I evolved these things into, okay, maybe I want to slightly round the icon, the input fields. Maybe I want to slightly round these buttons, playing around with special little icons, and slowly but surely making these feel a little bit better. And so as I'm laying this stuff out, I start to make these symbols. If I go back here, you can see that inside of this actual app flyout version here. So we've got score, we've got our foreground color, we've got our switch, we've got our background color, we've got our ratio, and then we also have our icon, our settings icon. Now, there's not a huge naming convention here. Everything is part of this app, so I didn't worry about control/whatever for these components. I just wanted something where the padding was built in. I've got this button here. So if I go to this control, I wanted there to be exactly 8 pixels here, and I wanted there to be exactly 8 pixels over there. So I'm building in the padding into that actual component. That way, when I go to assemble them, I can just snap them together and I know it's going to work well. That's where that Lego block mentality comes back in. You want it to be able to snap together without having to add in a spacer or extra things. Now, you can create a spacer if you need more space, and the spacer actually becomes its own component. And so you're saying, okay, I need to add in a 32 pixel spacer. That's definitely a possibility as well, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what I'm talking about here. But you can see here, we needed controls/light and controls/dark. And these are some variations that I was trying with sliders. Really, we have these 2 main ones here. So this is controls light and controls dark, because depending on the background that you chose, this thing can actually change color. So we wanted the ability for the color to change. Notice that the eyedroppers here are white, but if you reverse it out, they go to black. There's 2 different color variations, so we can account for all the different colors. If we analyze the background of both the controls light and the controls dark, you can see that I do have the background color set, but that's really only so you can see it on this white artboard. I have it where I'm not including it in the instances. That means that whenever I place this as a symbol. So if I go controls, dark, no sliders, and I want to place this somewhere, any instance of that is not going to have the background color. And the reason I did that is because I created all these color swatches. Now, this was a long time ago when Sketch didn't have the ability to override tints and things like that on certain symbols. So I created a lot of test color swatches, and I called them color 0073FF, all their hex codes. And then inside of these versions, if I look at the background at this particular symbol, you can see I've got another background here called the app. So this is the app right here. This is the kind of app background, which is this version here, app background, no sliders. And inside of this, you can see I've got a vector shape that includes this little path right here. I can move this guy around. And then I have the background color getting masked by that shape. So if I took this out, you can see that this is an instance of this background color that I've stretched out completely to be the background of that app. And the reason I did that is so that I could go onto here and I could go and I could say, okay, you know what? I wonder what this would look like if I changed the background color to, let's say, we want to go with this color. Now, all of a sudden, I can very, very quickly change out that background color because I've built this kind of system inside this little tiny world. I just needed a way that I could switch pieces out intelligently. That way I could test the colors on the strokes, test colors on the background, and test the icons. I needed the ability to test all of these different colors so we could make sure that what we were designing actually worked. So each one of these is an instance of the app that I can just change out that color of the background. And then I can also go in here and change that text. If I want to change the text, you can get in there and change that if you really wanted to. Hello. But that's just another example of a very small, tiny little design system, similar to that office supplies metaphor that was just for the two people that were working on it. So it was organized somewhat, but we don't have to go and build a huge design system website, and we don't need this big every single use case. What about toggle switch, and what about profile user icons? Well, our app doesn't have any of that, so I didn't need to build a full design system. I only created a system out of what I actually needed, and I didn't create the system until I designed the actual interface. Once I had the design for the interface, then I started chopping it up into little pieces and fine-tuning those little individual margin and padding. That way I could snap it all together and make it work well for what we needed to test. Okay, moving on to something a little bit more robust than that contrast app. I've shown this before, but I think this is a really good example of a solid design system with components and symbols. Now, this was built in Sketch, but all of these interface pieces on this particular screen, I put them all together with Sketch symbols. And it didn't start that way. I do want to point out that I've got this other file where I'm still trying to figure out how this should be styled. Should this be zebra stripe? Should this be purple highlighted? None of these were actually made it into the final designs because I was still tweaking these. It didn't feel quite right. But even some of these, like this, you can tell this is not a full symbol yet. I just have a line of text, and this text and everything is just kind of hanging out here. It's not a symbol. It's just kind of placeholder. It's in place, but I haven't fully componentized every single little item. I have some, but not all. For example, I did make components out of these little line items. If we go back to the actual final version of this and I click into here, you can see them all stacked up. They're all perfectly aligned with each other. They all have padding built into them, and they're all stacked right against each other. So if I go into individual versions, I end up with this. So I have my backgrounds, I have my catalog, and I have my label here. My label is another symbol here. So inside of this, I have my label. So if I zoom out a little bit, you can see that if I move this label, this is the kind of child label. If I move it all the way, everything's going to change. This is the primary area where I've got the text label. And then I have these little 16 by 16 icons that kind of fit right inside of here. But if I go into this, you can see I've got all these little 16 by 16 icons, including this status indicator. So I have a combination of this loader and this status indicator. So this is all one line item, but I've got a combination of catalog label. So I'll just place that there. Let's go ahead and give myself a little black background to work against. And then we've got our little icon here. So I've actually placed this icon just right on the edge of that. And then I just went ahead and created a full new component out of that. And then a bunch of variations. So this is what happens when you download a new version. This is what happens when you just loaded that version. This is what it looks like when it's downloading, and so on and so forth. So I have this little mini tiny little system inside of the line item. So this is something that you just loaded. This is something that's downloaded. And then I've also got the background color that changes if you've selected that item. So this is a great metaphor for a bigger, larger system. All of the padding is built in. Everything is snapped against each other. And we have little individual pieces that can be switched out. And that all comes down to the naming convention and also the sizing of everything. All of these are the same exact size, and we've got the icons in the same exact position. So we have these two abstracted areas that can pull from this library and then pull from that library to create that one particular item. So at the top level, you have these arrows, and then as you drill down, you get these other instruments that are a part of this that end up having these little individual components. And then once I had this list, I even came in here and I had to create a header version of that. But it's hard to design. You don't necessarily know that you need 23 pixels up here and then 20 pixels there. And notice how this arrow is offset a little bit. If you're designing this in isolation, it's going to be hard to make decisions like that. So I'm always going back and forth between this version here. So you can see catalog group. So I pushed this over because I wanted that arrow to line up with the rest of these individual text fields. And if you go out to the full page, you can see that I've got an icon here that lines up really well with the 01 and then the favorites brass choir. So this catalog actually changes to a back arrow once you go a few layers deep. And then the favorites there, you can see that now I've got this arrow here as well. And all of this still lines up. And I'm looking at this together, only with these stacked on top of each other can I tell that I need this negative space in here. So it's a matter of putting out the full design and then slowly and carefully reassembling these building blocks that you can pop back into place. And if you can think about it as snapping things directly together and building that padding in, that will help you when you're designing from the first go around. It'll help you be a lot more mindful of those little decisions like that. The same theory applies to this line item here. We have all of these instruments are getting loaded. So I have this just simply called instruments. Inside of the instrument, we have a title and a number here because this determines the slot that you're using. But then I've got, just like that contrast app, I have the solo mute available option. And then I have the CC channel here. And then I've got the volume slider and then the X button. And so all of these are right in place. And each one of them has a variation. So if I double click into this, you can see I'm using the naming convention, instrument controls CC1. Now I just made that up. I could have called it anything I wanted to, but to me it made sense that I have this one instrument line item and I have like 3 different controls on that line item. So why not call it instrument / controls / and then the name of that individual object. That way, if they're all the same name and they're all the same size, I can switch them out very, very easily. So I've got controls CC1. I've got controls CC2 if you have 2 different channels that you want to control. And then I have one that is actually active. So this one is completely deactive. It's zero on that channel. And this one is showing like halfway. So I'm designing those sliders and the knobs and everything, but I'm designing in context with that slider so that it can be changed out on the fly when I get ready to. And then the other version, we have the standard kind of volume up. That should probably have a purple slider in there. I think I might have left that out by mistake. If you mute the channel, then you get the mute icon in here. And then if you do have this active controls and you have 2 different channels, then you can show the volume knob. But really, all of this is designed in these little blocks so that when I go into the actual page and I have all these instruments loaded into place like this, I can easily go in here and say, okay, for this one, I want to show what it looks like when this volume is all the way up. Or actually, you know what? Let's show this one instrument. Maybe, okay, this volume, I want the volume to be maybe volume levels active. So I just switch that out. Or maybe I want this to be volume levels split. And so I can switch these out very easily to show like a variation of what's happening. So the system is really a matter of what makes sense for you designing it, especially if you have other designers involved and you kind of come to an agreement on, okay, let's call it instrument, controls, and volume. You might have to whiteboard this out with someone. And if you have a developer that you're working with, they might have an opinion on the way that things need to be structured as well. So the design system becomes much more complicated when more people are involved, because not everyone is going to fully understand exactly why you made your decisions. And you might not know how to make some of those decisions on your own. Sometimes you might be a part of a larger effort to make that design system come to life, and you're part of a bigger team that is kind of all working together for that. That's exactly what happened on this ExxonMobil design system. I was working with 4 or 5 other people just on the design team, and then also 4 or 5 people on the client side. And this is just a small snippet of just kind of a spattering of components that we put together. The real version was actually built into a website as we were designing it. We were designing it and coding it all at the same time, getting feedback from the client, making changes to the code, making changes to the design over and over and over. So for example, this one little stepper design, step 1, 2, 3, step 4, the active step, and then these 5. This is actually the sketch file that I used to design the stepper, and it's not even organized. I didn't name this. I didn't create any symbols out of this because their design team didn't even use Sketch. They were really big into Adobe products, and we were just delivering the actual code design system. And then after the fact, we were going to go create whatever they needed in their design files. So this is some of the just unorganized design assets that I created that was quickly converted into code, because the living, breathing code is the actual system, not really the design file. The design file kind of tries to be that system, and there is a big effort to make those two communicate more, but it's really the design system lives and breathes and is inside of the code. And just for fun, here's a quick little video that they put together of the ExxonMobil design system, just to show you kind of all the different pages and all the different things that went into it. It was definitely a multi-month project. It took a very long time. Check it out.
Meet Unity, our new ExxonMobil design system that makes building exceptional web applications faster than ever. At the heart of Unity is a set of ready-to-use UI components and page templates that developers use to quickly assemble interfaces. It's as simple as copy and paste to bring these components into a project. By reusing these UI components across projects, developers can create beautiful, intuitive interfaces with less work. Unity is built on a foundation of modern best practices for user experience. All markup is fully responsive, so it works great on any screen size. Unity also embraces high standards for accessibility, usability, and performance. Unity was built on ExxonMobil's existing brand guidelines, so apps get the right look and feel right out of the box. Unity styles the basic colors, fonts, and icons so developers can focus their energy on real challenges. Get started and learn more at GoToUnity. Let's bring Unity to ExxonMobil's app.
There's also a term floating around called design tokens that seem to trip up people because it's kind of a new term, but really a design token is a formalized and centralized version of the variable. Now, variable can just be something like color primary is blue, or blue equals 0088FF. Those are variables, something that can be assigned a different name. But the design token is more of like a formalized version of that everyone can adjust and have eyes on, not just the developer or not just the designer. So tokens are variables that actually make sense. It's not just randomly assigned. They can be easily understood. Everyone's aware of the naming methodology, and it's quite intuitive to make decisions with them. So you might have color dash background, color dash divider, color dash whatever you decide as a team that makes sense. That's kind of like that design token group effort. So you want people to have those tokens to be able to use and it be intuitive to use them. And that's again where that naming comes in. There's not really a way for me to say, hey, this is exactly how you should name everything. There are some approaches to naming things, and you can take your own opinion, but it's really about communication. You have to talk to the people you're working with. You have to talk to the developers and any other stakeholders that are going to be using the system. That's going to be key to really make this work. Tokens are really the mortar that bridge the decisions with the code that implements them. So your design decisions and the code and kind of everything is kind of built off that token mentality. Your design decisions become the code, and that code runs the entire website or app. So if your decisions are kind of messy and haphazard, then so will the implementation. So the more more you can talk to the team members, the more you can really sit down with a pen and a piece of paper or even a spreadsheet or in a text editor and really think through those naming conventions, whether it's size first or color first, and what are the slight variations on that going to be? Is it Lego brick single yellow brick single blue, or is it yellow brick single or blue brick single or blue brick double? There's just so many variations. There's so many versions that you could create. You really have to do that hard work of figuring out the naming convention and the categorization on your own. So for your design system homework, I'm not going to get you to create a huge design system, but rather one of those kind of like a small panel, like a small card-based module with a couple of line items in it. Maybe similar even to the Cinesampler example that I showed you that had the category name and then several different icons. So we're going to have a card with multiple variations of list items. And you can name them however you want, but they should be able to be interchanged really quickly and easily. They should be named similarly, so they all show up in the symbols panel at the same time or the components panel. And you should be able to scale them a little bit. So you might need to add some resizing rules on the individual interior pieces. They should also have very calculated margins built in all the way around them so they can snap together, just like our Lego brick example. So I'll list out a bunch of different variations down below. Think about a really intelligent way to name them. And if you were imagine just like handing it off to someone, would it make sense? Imagine needing to pass this on to someone. So you might actually create another little side frame that documents the colors, the names of the colors, or even the names of the list item. Say list item with toggle. This is used for when there's an on-off switch. Or list item with arrow. This is used when you need to go dig deeper, one level deeper into a navigation. So just stick with a few line items just to get that kind of basic practice down with optimal sizing all the way around, optimal naming and snapping everything together. Maybe you even add a symbol for the background for the card. Maybe you change it from light mode to dark mode and you have list item dark, list item light. And do you put dark and light in the middle or do you put dark and light on the end as a variation? It's really up to you, whatever makes the most sense. So have at it, and I can't wait to see what you come up with.